Hey guys, so I have known something about myself for a while, and that's that I get rather obsessive when it comes to things that I have enjoyed. And nothing has been more prevalent recently with that than the book series A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I picked this book up a few weeks ago and it kind of just sat on my shelf. I didn't find the time to read it, I just wasn't reading as much. But I was packing for a family weekend away, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna have a ton of time in the car by myself. Might as well just bring this with me. The internet is horrendous where I was going, so I figured a book would be a good substitute for that. So I picked this up, I put it in my bag, and didn't really think much of it. I was about a few hours into the car ride when my dad and brother in the front seats started talking about sports, and I'm just like, I don't care, I don't want to listen to this. So I grabbed this book and I start reading it, and oh my gosh, it was so good. I was immediately hooked. I ended up being super busy that day and didn't get a chance to pick it up again, but the next day on the car ride home, I kept going. I just kept reading, and we got home and I still kept reading, and then I finished it in the early afternoon. So exciting. So what did I do? I didn't, look on Amazon and be like, hey, how much are the rest of the books? I'll order them, get them in a couple days. No, I get in my car and I drive to Target and I buy the rest of the series and then finish the rest of the series that same day. Yeah, I think obsessive is a really good word to describe what I was doing with this. But I absolutely fell in love with this series. I thought it was so good. So today I am going to be taking you guys through the first book in the series, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I have a whiteboard that I'm going to be doing my own little murder board on, because I don't have a cork board that I can do red string with, but I'm going to be doing that today for you guys. I thought it'd be really fun. I'm so excited to do it because this book series is so good, but I'm going to be realistic and we're going to do it one book at a time. So yeah, I am super excited and let's get into it. Also, I did want to give you guys such a big thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have gotten so much love recently on my Miraculous rewrite, and we hit over 500 subscribers, which is mind-blowing to me. I cannot believe that we have gotten this far. It's insane. And I don't know where all this support has come from. It's just amazing, and from the bottom of my heart, I thank you guys so much for everything, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and any other future videos. Welcome to everybody that is new. I know there's a lot of new guys here, so I appreciate all of you, and welcome. I'm so excited to have you here. So let's start with reading the back cover and a little blurb for this book. This is the story of an investigation turned obsession. Pretty and popular high school senior Andy Bell was murdered by her boyfriend Sal Singh, who then killed himself. It was all anyone could talk about. And 5 years later, Pip sees how the tragedy still haunts her town. Now a senior herself, Pip decides to re-examine the closed case for her final project, at first just to cast doubt on the original investigation. But soon, she discovers a trail of dark secrets that might actually prove Sal innocent. And the line between past and present begins to blur. Someone in Fairview doesn't want Pip digging around for answers, and now her own life might be in danger. It was enough to get me hooked. Alrighty, so we open this book on the start of Pip, our main character's senior capstone project, described as an investigation into the media's coverage of a criminal case through the examination of the disappearance of Andy Bell. However, it is very clear very early on that this is not Pip's real intention with this project. Pip is doing this project to try and prove that the man that was accused of killing Andy Bell, her boyfriend, Sal Singh, is actually innocent. So the first thing that Pip immediately decides to do is to go and talk to Ravi, who is Sal's younger brother, who agrees to speak with her later in the week for her project. Now, I think it's important to lay out what the publicly available story is from the beginning of the book about what happened the night of April 18th, 2014, which is the night that Andie Bell disappeared. So, on the night of April 18th, 2014, Sal had been hanging out with some of his friends, Max Hastings, Naomi Ward, Jake Lawrence, and Millie Simpson. Sal reportedly told police that he had left Max's home around 12:15 a.m., choosing to walk home, which was confirmed by his father, Mohan, saying he arrived home around 12:50. This timeline sort of fits. It should have only taken him about 30 minutes to walk home, but it's still relatively close. And his alibi was confirmed by his friends that weekend. April 18th was a Friday, and by Monday, missing posters had already gone up, and Tuesday is where things started to get really confusing. So around mid-morning, all of Sal's friends spoke to police, and they told police that Sal had asked them to lie for him, and he had actually left Max's house around 10:30 p.m. And that Tuesday evening, the police who had been searching for Andie found a body. But it wasn't Andie's. It was Sal, and it was very clear that he had committed suicide. That night led to the revelation that Andie was seen leaving her home by a security camera at around 12:40 p.m. that Friday. Andie's car was found on the next day, Wednesday, on a back road, and by the following Monday, the police had concluded their investigation. They believed that Sal had kidnapped and killed Andie before committing suicide the following Tuesday, after it was revealed that he had asked his friends to lie for him. They did have evidence to support this because Andie's phone was found on Sal's body, as well as her blood underneath his fingernails. Her blood was also found in the trunk of her car, and his fingerprints were found all over the wheel and the dashboard of the car. Andie, though, was never found. Officially, Sal could not be charged with Andie's disappearance and murder, but in the mind of everyone in Fairview, he was 100% guilty, and there was really nothing that was going to change that. One of the main ways that we get information about what happened that night and where people were is through transcripts of phone interviews that Pip does. I think this is a very interesting way to kind of break up the book and involve different types of formats and stuff, and I think it was a really good choice by Holly Jackson to do this. I love it. So the first interview that Pip conducts is with somebody who works in the Missing Persons Bureau, just to kind of get a baseline of how missing persons cases work. Next, she decides to interview Stanley Forbes, a journalist in Fairview that had covered the case originally. During this interview, Pip sort of questions Stanley's motives during the initial coverage of the case, leading him to get rather defensive and ending the interview rather early. One important thing that we do learn from this interview, though, is that a death threat was found in Andie's locker prior to her disappearance, and it was believed that this note had been written by Sal. So these interviews that we read kind of come as a transcript of the notes that Pip is writing for her project, and at the end we always get a little bit of speculation from her. And the big speculation that she comes to after Stanley's interview is that it's a little too coincidental that Sal and Andie had just kind of met up, and if he was guilty, he had just decided to kidnap her. If there had been no prior communication between the two during that night. I love this sense of speculation that we get from Pip. The notes for her project really give us a good look at her inner thoughts, and it does a really good job of pushing the audience in a certain direction and towards certain suspects that Holly Jackson wants you to believe are super suspicious, because Pip finds them suspicious, and we get to hear her whole thought process surrounding that. I think it's great. I love this change in format throughout the book. Next, we get on to Pip's interview with Ravi Singh, Sal's younger brother. He describes Sal's behavior that night as pretty typical and nothing out of the ordinary. We learned that Sal and Andie had been together for about 4 months. They got together around Christmas, and the day that he found out she was missing, Saturday, He spent the entire day calling her phone like every few minutes, just trying to find her. He did this on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, which, when you think about it, based off of the evidence, that's a little weird because Sal had Andy's phone on his body when he was found. So why would he be calling her phone constantly if he had it on him? Nothing about what Roofie says about Sal and his behavior the entire weekend of Andy's disappearance seems suspicious. Nothing about it is suspicious, except for one thing that happened on Tuesday. So Tuesday, Sal had texted his father, "It was me. I did it. I'm so sorry." That sounds like a confession. So it makes sense why prosecutors and the police thought that Sal was guilty. There's a lot of evidence supporting this. Roofie consistently characterizes Sal as one of the happiest people he knew. He was a straight-A student, and the thought that his brother just killed somebody does not make sense to him based off of the person that he knew. None of it makes sense to Roofie at all. This is where Pip tells Roofie the real reason that she is investigating this case. Sal was best friends with Pip's best friend's older sister, and she had gotten to know him a little bit through hanging out at her best friend's house. And she described him as always being super kind to her, always helping her, even helping her with a situation where she was being bullied in middle school. And she says that he was a hero to her, and she just can't believe that he would do it. The biggest takeaway that we get from this interview, though, is that Roofie believes that Jason Bell, Andy's father, had something to do with her disappearance. This is where we get introduced to Pip's persons of interest list, and the first name to go on that list is Jason Bell. The next interview that Pip conducts is with Naomi Ward. She was one of Sal's closest friends, and she is the older sister of Pip's best friend. Naomi reveals that Sal and Andy's relationship wasn't all happy, and they tended to argue over small things. And she confirms what she amended to police, saying that Sal left Max's house around 10:30 that night, and she ended up staying the night there. When Pip asks Naomi why she and her friends lied for Sal, she tells her that Sal had asked them to come over on Saturday, and he was super nervous and eventually asked them to lie about the time he left Max's house. The reason that they ended up telling police that he actually left at 10:30 instead of 12:15 was that they didn't want to get in trouble for lying, and none of them thought Sal was guilty, so they didn't think telling the police would do anything. They just didn't want to get in trouble for lying to them. Naomi is also on the side of believing that Sal did not kill Andy. The next interview that Pip conducts is with Max Hastings, another one of Sal's friends and the one who was hosting the get-together that Sal was at the night of Andy's disappearance. Before we are able to read the transcript of this interview, Pip writes that she can't help but feel that something is going on, and that either she is being lied to or all of Sal's friends are just like misremembering what happened that night, because things are not adding up. Max tells her that he remembers the entire night and that Sal had left pretty early and Naomi had disappeared for a little while in the night, but he's pretty sure that she just went upstairs. Max is under the impression that Sal had to have done it because there's really no other explanation for all of the evidence that points to him. These two interviews definitely have some inconsistencies between one another. This unfortunately leads Pip to the conclusion that maybe Naomi had something to do with what happened to Andy, and reluctantly she becomes the second person on her persons of interest list. This is where I really started to find Pip's character super interesting. The fact that she was willing to put the older sister of her best friend on the suspect list really paints an interesting picture for who she is as a character. It also definitely made me start to think about how far Pip was going to be willing to go and how many bridges she might burn in order to truly investigate this case. And it was definitely one of the things that got me super hooked on this book, and I just wanted to keep reading to see how far this would really go. Next comes her interview with Elliot Ward, who is Naomi and her best friend Cara'S father. Elliot is a teacher at the high school and was one of Sal's teachers. Elliot had a closer relationship with Sal because Sal was hoping to study history at Yale, and Elliot helped him with his application as he was the AP history teacher. He says that he doesn't remember Sal acting very strange that Monday because everybody was acting strange. It just kind of like fit in with what everybody was like acting like, because of course everyone's gonna act strange if a popular girl in school just disappears. However, he has no information on how Sal was acting on Tuesday because he had called in sick to work that day. He says that as wrong as it is, he feels as though Sal must have killed Andy because there's no other explanation based on the evidence that police found. And he says that he really didn't know Andy that well as he never had her as a student. So Pip and Ravi begin to hang out a little bit more, and Ravi reveals that he had tried to do what Pip is doing right now in investigating the case, but he had been forced to drop it by his parents. So here are Pip's current working theories. These don't have people involved, just kind of like speculations on what might have happened. We do have the path of least resistance, which is just the fact that Sal killed Andy and committed suicide out of guilt. She does have 4 other theories, though. The first one is that a third party killed Andy, but Sal was somehow involved in whatever way that might mean. Secondly is that a third party killed Andy, Sal was not involved, and his suicide later were out of reasons outside of being guilty, and the evidence just has some other sort of explanation. Third is that a third party killed both Andy and Sal and framed him for the murder. Finally, she has a theory that maybe Andy isn't dead. She faked her disappearance and somehow lured Sal out into the woods and killed him, making the scene look as though she was dead as well to be able to like run away and disappear. This is where Ravi tells Pip that he wants to help with this investigation, and then gives her Sal's cell phone. They're able to look through it, and Pip kind of gets a good feeling of Sal's texting style, which does not match the so-called confession text that was sent to his dad. It's similar, it doesn't have any capital letters, but there's a lot of punctuation in it, which was not Sal's style at all. They also find a note in his phone that is the numbers 009KKJ, which they conclude must be a license plate number, but Ravi says that he tried to look it up and couldn't find anything. The next interview that Pip conducts is with Andy's former best friend, Emma. She claims that she had seen Sal and Andy arguing on both Thursday and Friday, the day that she disappeared, and apparently Sal looked very angry. And she reveals that Andy was not supposed to be going anywhere that night, and that she was supposed to stay home with her sister, who had just been hospitalized. We get to learn a little bit more about Andy here, and Emma says that she really didn't like the person that she was when she was friends with Andy, and that she could be really cruel. She's not saying that she deserved what happened to her, but she could sort of understand why Sal had snapped and killed her. Pip is then able to get in contact with Chloe, who was Andy's other best friend. Chloe is pretty hesitant to describe Sal and Andy as exclusive, and also tells Pip that Andy had a lot of money that neither her nor Emma knew where it came from. She just always had a lot of money on her. After the interview, Pip does something a little bit unethical and texts Emma pretending to be Chloe. She's able to learn that Andy was meeting with this secret older guy, and that there was some secret involving Jason Bell, most likely that he was cheating on Andy's mom, and that Andy knew about it. This adds another person to the persons of interest list, which is this secret older guy, and puts Jason Bell's name in bold fully at the top of the list. That weekend, Pip goes camping with some of her friends, and as they're camping, she gets this eerie feeling that she's being watched. And eventually, she finds a note that reads, "Stop digging, Pippa." Pippa's her full name. This obviously freaks her out, but she thinks that one of her friends must have done it, but eventually it's clear that none of them did it. This is the end of part 1 of the book, and Holly Jackson is really throwing a lot of information at the audience during this first part. There's a lot to learn about not only the days between Andy and Sal's deaths, but all of the months and weeks leading up to it as well. She provides very clear suspects, which obviously keeps the readers thinking, as well as casting reasonable doubt on others. I think that the characters are definitely a really strong part of this book, especially Pip, the main character. From the questions that she asks people, it's clear that she isn't always concerned with how she appears to them, and she's just going to go straight for the information, even if it makes the person she's interviewing uncomfortable, which also tends to put her off to other people, especially Andy's 2 best friends, through her leading questions about Jason Bell specifically. This is definitely a strong start to the mystery, and this is where I was really getting to the point of having a hard time putting this book down. Now we get on to part 2. It's quickly becoming clear that Pip is keeping secrets from her best friend Cara, who is Naomi's younger sister, because she obviously doesn't want to tell Cara that Naomi is on her persons of interest list, and that she thinks Naomi was the one to put that note in her tent because she was the only one of Pip's current suspects that knew that she was going camping. Later on, Pip is able to get another interview with Emma, and she asks him about this secret older guy. Emma doesn't know the guy's name and never told police about him because she was convinced that he wasn't real and that Andy was just making him up. She then tells Pip that Andy was not a fan of Elliot Ward, and this obviously sends Pip into a tailspin because she can barely look Naomi in the eye right now, and now it's possible that Elliot is involved, and it's getting to be a little bit too much for her. And she's now starting to think that Elliot was lying to her because he said that he barely knew Andy. Could Elliot have been the secret older man, and that's why Andy was not a big fan of him? We don't know, but he has been added to the persons of interest list. At school the next day, Pip ends up just coming out and asking Elliot why he lied. He reveals that he wasn't super comfortable talking about this, but he had learned that Andy was bullying another girl, and rather than going to the police, he ended up talking to her dad, Jason Bell, to try and sort the situation out, and he figures that Andy must have learned that he was the one that told her dad, and that's why she wasn't a big fan of him. Pip ends up doing another interview with Naomi to get more clarification on the specific bullying instance, and she ends up telling Pip about this girl, Natalie Da Silva, and that she was the one that Andy had bullied. Apparently, Andy had gotten a topless photo of Natalie and shared it around the entire school. She'd also threatened Natalie into giving her the lead in the school play by saying that she would tell everyone that Natalie's older brother, Daniel, had been inappropriate with her while he was working as a janitor for the school. That day, Pip and Ravi decide to go and talk to Natalie, and she's only willing to talk to Ravi because Sal had always been nice to her. She admits that she had wanted Annie dead for a while for what she did to her, and we learn that Nat was the one that put the threatening note in Andy's locker. However, she was home that night with her parents and sister-in-law, and her brother was apparently out with his friends. After they leave her house, they look up her sister and realize that this was the cop that had told Ravi to back off digging into his brother's case. He had shut down any of the questions that he had, and he had apparently become a cop right before Andy had disappeared. Now they have added 2 more people on to the persons of interest list, Natalie and Daniel Da Silva. One of the first things that Pip had done in her investigation was request a transcript of Sal's interview with the police that was conducted the day after Andy disappeared, and that was finally granted. However, after reading through it, things aren't looking great for Sal. He does not tell the police what he and Andy were arguing about on Thursday and Friday, and seemed generally evasive in all of his answers. And this is where Pip kind of starts to wonder if she was wrong to investigate this case. But then she remembers the note that she got that was threatening her to stop digging, and realizes that there must be something there that someone doesn't want her to find out. A few days later, Pip runs into Becca Bell, who is Andy's sister. Becca is not too keen on answering questions about her sister, which obviously makes sense. And Pip's really not asking good questions that Becca would really want to answer, such as ones about, like, her family's dynamics. And eventually, like, later on, Pip admits that it was probably not her best idea to try and interview Becca. Becca spells her name wrong, though. She does it with C's, and I don't like it. Sorry to any Beccas watching that spell their name with C's. I obviously don't, and I have a vendetta against that spelling because that's all anyone spells my name as, and I hate it. She does decide to try and interview Jess Walker, who was one of Becca's best friends at the time of Andy's disappearance. Jess says that things were always, like, really off between Jason and his daughters as well as his wife. He would say, like, little digs at their appearances, and Jess just kind of described it as very unsettling and that she just genuinely did not want to be over at Becca's house. This treatment from their father wrecked both Andy's and Becca's self-esteem. Jess then tells Pip that she and Becca had gone to one of the house parties in town known as Calamities, and at one point during the night, Becca just totally completely disappeared on her. And the next morning, she asked Jess to go out with her and buy the morning after pill, but refused to tell her anything about what happened that night. One more really important piece of information that we learn is that during the party, Jess saw Andy and Max Hastings talking to one another, and they seemed rather close. Obviously, this conversation was very revealing for Pip. Jason Bell, specifically, is looking worse and worse and worse, but it's also clear to her that Max Hastings was definitely lying to her because he told her that he and Andy were not close at all. She also figured out through looking through Naomi's tagged photos on Facebook that Max has a secret Facebook page, and if she could get access to that page, she might be able to see photos of the night Andy disappeared. Pip decides to then ambush Max at his house, trying to get answers, and it's quite clear that Max is getting fed up with her. As she's questioning him, she notices something behind one of his posters and ends up finding a rather intimate photo of Andy there. He just claims that he found it lying around school, hidden in the back of a classroom, but Pip doesn't really believe him. He does eventually tell her that he knew Andy a lot better than he originally claimed. This was because he was buying drugs from her, which means Andy Bell was dealing drugs. This explained all of the cash that she always had on her, and Max tells her that Sal had no idea this was going on. Pip obviously wants to follow this lead a little bit further and decides to go to one of the Calamity parties to try and figure out who Andy was buying the drugs from, who her dealer was. At the Calamity party, Pip is able to talk to this guy named Steven and figures out that he buys his drugs from this guy in town named Howie Bowers and figures that he must have been the same person that Andy was buying drugs from. She ends up going to the place where Steven says he meets Howie, but she has no luck spotting him. However, she does add Howie Bowers to the persons of interest list. So every time that Pip adds somebody to her persons of interest list, there seems to be pretty good evidence to support her putting them on her list. It doesn't seem flippant and out of nowhere, and there's a lot of good evidence to suggest that everybody that she puts on the list might have a reason for wanting Andy dead. And this is where the book was really starting to remind me of the TV show Pretty Little Liars. More specifically, Andy reminds me a lot of Alison De Laurentiis from that show. The investigation into her disappearance and murder feels very similar to the one that the girls from Pretty Little Liars conduct into Alison's disappearance, and the multiple different people that have a motive for wanting Andy dead is also very similar. There's so much that we don't know about the night Andy disappeared, and we slowly learn more and more and more as the book goes, just as we slowly learn more and more and more about the night Allison disappeared. Maybe this is just because I'm currently rewatching Pretty Little Liars, so it's like fresh on my mind, but I can't help but feel that these two are so similar, especially with like all of like the secret keeping that Allison did, and now it's revealed that Andy was doing a lot of secret keeping as well. I just think it's very interesting. This is not like in a bad way at all. I just think it's really interesting, and that's definitely part of the reason that I got hooked on this book, was because it was so similar to something that I have enjoyed before. So this obviously fit the bill for something I already knew that I liked. Pip goes back to the train station the next night and is able to spot Howie Bowers. She also spots Stanley Forbes, the journalist, talking with him, and Stanley is obviously very angry, but Pip isn't able to make out much of the conversation. Stanley leaves and she spots a boy from her class meeting with Howie and is able to get a picture of the drug deal to use as leverage against Howie. She follows him after he leaves and realizes that he lives on the same street that Andy's car was found on after she disappeared. She immediately calls Ravi and gets him to join her. I had to change the angle. My back was literally going to kill me if I didn't. So we're here, we're chilling, we're relaxing. I'm just going to hold the mic. It's going to be great. When Ravi does show up, Pip ends up telling him that she had lied to him about Sal's interview transcript coming in the mail because it had looked really bad for him, and she was like, I don't know, maybe he is guilty, but now she's 100% sure he's definitely not guilty. I don't know what I was thinking. There's too many things that we don't know that could possibly lead us to finding Andy's real killer. That is when the two of them notice the license plate on Howie Bowers' car. 009 KKJ. The same as the one written in Sal's phone. This is where they figure out that this must have been what Sal and Andy had been arguing about in the days leading up to her disappearance. Sal must have figured out what she was doing and followed her. That's how he figured it out, and that's why he had the license plate written in his phone, and he was confronting her about it. This must have also been the reason that he was very evasive with the police. It wasn't that he was trying to protect himself, he was trying to protect Andy because he thought she was still alive and didn't want her to get in trouble when she came back. The two decide, or rather Pip decides to ambush Howie and uses the photo as blackmail, saying that she'll go to the police with it. We learn that Andy had been working with Howie in early 2013, about a year before she disappeared, and he tells them that she would use secret codes to like keep track of who she was selling to and like meetups and stuff, and that she also had a second phone for this. Apparently she had hidden it under a loose floorboard in her closet. Andy sold a whole bunch of different drugs, from like weed and other things like that all the way up to roofies, and she was selling the roofies specifically to some rich blonde guy. In the end, he does make it very clear that he was not romantically involved with Andy, so that could knock him off the secret older guy suspect list, but not 100%. This does kind of give us a list, though, of who could be this secret older guy, because in the texts with Andy's old best friends, Pip was able to figure out that Andy said she could ruin this secret older guy. So now we kind of have three main suspects on who could be this secret older guy. Howie Bowers, Max Hastings, as he was a couple years older than Sal and the rest of his friends, as well as Andy, and Daniel Da Silva. The next day, Pip ends up getting a text from an unknown number, which reads, "You stupid bitch, leave us alone while you still can." This is obviously getting very real, and Pip is starting to get a little bit nervous, but it also means that she must be getting close to something. There hasn't really been a lot of tension specifically for Pip during this investigation, although there is still kind of the threat of Andy's killer still lurking around Fairview to provide sort of like ambient background tension, but these notes definitely really do bring her fully into the danger that this case presents in a way that just investigating it probably wouldn't have. Now, with this note and the text, it does kind of give us potential clues on who could be threatening her and, by extension, would have killed Andy. And firstly, it's that the person must have known that she was going camping, so they have to be relatively close to her, and they have to have had her phone number, otherwise how would they have texted her? The next day, Pip ends up skipping school and takes Ravi over to the Bell's house to break in to try and find Andy's second phone. She thinks there has to be some sort of information on that could lead them to her killer. They manage to break in, but they do not find the phone anywhere, but they do find Andy's planner still on her desk. And inside, they find a whole bunch of initials with times that they figure out must have been the code that she was using that Howie had mentioned. Mostly they can determine that Andy had used initials to refer to different locations. There is a lot of different TS's written, which they infer is the train station where she would meet up with Howie to get the drugs, and HH, which they guess must mean Howie's house, so she must have met up there as well. There's another one that says IV, but they can't figure that one out. It could refer to like the Roman numeral 4, or if it matches the others, it could be some location that includes the initials I and V. There's also a phone number that has been scribbled out, and Pip can't read the last few digits, and she tries some combinations, but nothing seems to go through, so she gives up on that lead. Ravi does come up with some possible solutions for what the IV could stand for. One of them's a nightclub, which they both think isn't quite accurate, but another is an inn called the Ivy House Inn. When Pip looks up reviews of the inn, she realizes that the intimate photo that Max has of Andy was taken at the Ivy House Inn. This leads them to wonder, could the Ivy House Inn have been the place where she was meeting with this secret older guy? She and Ravi decide to take the train to the inn the next day and end up speaking to the old woman who owns the place, and this woman confirms that yes, Andy was there around 5 years ago. The two end up leaving and speculate that the reason that she would go and meet with this secret older guy at the inn was because she could not go over to his house due to him probably having a family or at least a wife. So through this, they're able to rule out Howie as a suspect for being the secret older guy, not completely as a suspect, but that still leaves Max and Daniel as potential people for being the secret older guy. As they are just standing and talking at the train station, they spot Howie yelling at somebody, and who is it but none other than Max Hastings. Once again, Max Hastings has lied to Pip, saying that he had never bought drugs in Fairview after Andy had disappeared, and that he had no clue who her dealer was. But here he was, and he very clearly knew at least who her dealer was, whether or not he'd actually bought drugs from him in the last 5 years. Pip has now decided that Max Hastings has to be top of the persons of interest list, bold, italicized, everything. And there is a chance that maybe he and Howie were conspiring with one another to kill Andy. There is still the Roofie situation where she is determined that the rich blonde guy that was buying them from Andy was 100% Max. So she starts to message people that were going to school around the time of Andy, Max, and Sal, and asking them if they knew about drinks getting spiked at calamity parties. She learns that there were several girls that had reported their drinks being spiked at the parties, but most people just thought that they were just super drunk and didn't really think much of it. Although there is one email that is rather interesting, and it claimed that Nat De Silva thought her drink was spiked at one of the parties. Another email confirms that the drink spiking absolutely happened because her friend had gotten very messed up, did not remember what happened the next day, and even went to the police about it, but she was shut down after she spoke to a young male police officer, and nothing ever came of it. So it certainly seems as though Max was buying roofies from Andy and spiking the drinks of girls at calamity parties in 2014. And after doing some research, Pip realizes that there was only one young male police officer on the Fairview force in 2014, Daniel De Silva. This is definitely bringing Daniel closer and closer to the case, but more so, Max is looking worse and worse and worse the more Pip digs. So that night, Pip enlists Cara'S help and asks her to use her sister's Facebook account to look at Max's secret account to go through the calamity party photos from the night that Andy disappeared. Pip gets Naomi's login information and starts looking through the photos and realizes that Max uploaded about 10 photos from the night that Andy disappeared. However, they weren't uploaded until the following Monday, and this is consistent with all of the people that were there, minus Sal, of course. So Max, Naomi, Jake, and Millie. However, middle of the night, a realization hits her, and she remembers one specific photo where you can see Max, Naomi, Jake, and Millie all in the photo, but none of them are holding the camera. So who's taking the photo? It is obviously Sal. You can even see it in like the reflection of one of the windows, I think, and you can see like the color of his shirt or whatever. That is 100% Sal. And you can also see Naomi's phone lock screen in the photo. And what is the time on her lock screen? 12:09 a.m. Sal was at Max's house past midnight, meaning that he never left the house at 10:30 like all of his friends said he did. He did leave at 12:15 like he originally said. This doesn't 100% prove that Sal is innocent yet, as there is still the time frame between 12:15 and 12:50 when he arrived home that he could have still done the kidnapping and murder. So the next day, Pip and Ravi set out to determine if he legitimately could have done it. So they go through the entire night, what must have happened, how it all would have worked to determine if Sal could have actually committed the crime, and they are being as generous as possible, using the closest locations that they can to make this theory work. And they are like inconceivably efficient when it comes to committing this like crime, hypothetically. And there's definitely not enough time. There is absolutely no way that Sal committed the crime from the time period of 12:15 a.m. to 12:50 a.m. No way. So there it is. Sal is innocent. 100%, no doubt. He did not do it. But this means Pip has to now go and talk to Naomi once again, because something is not adding up here. She gets over to the Ward's house, and Cara, Naomi, and Max are all there doing homework. Perfect timing for Max to be there. She eventually is able to confront both Naomi and Max about the photo and how they lied about the time that Sal actually left Max's house. And Naomi is just freaking out, and she's like, Max, we've got to tell her. And Max is like, no, we don't have to tell her anything. But Naomi eventually wins out. So here is this story. Apparently, there had been somebody who had texted the 4 friends that were there, Max, Naomi, Jake, and Millie, to delete every picture of Sal from that night and lie about the time that he had left Max's house. This was on Tuesday. And the only reason they had done it was because this person knew about something that the 4 of them had done, and this was something that was really bad. So all 4 of them had been at a party, they were all kind of drunk, and they ended up hitting somebody in Max's car and left them on the side of the road. And luckily the man didn't die, but he ended up in a coma and is currently paralyzed. None of them had told anybody about that at all, so they were all shocked that somebody knew what happened, and in an effort to save themselves, they lied about the time that Sal had left the house. We're going to get some more answers here, and Pip asked Naomi about where she disappeared off to during the party, and she says that she was talking to Sal about Andy, and he was apparently very angry about something that she had done, and he was going to break up with her and seemed very relieved about it. This, we know now, is her dealing drugs, but I don't think Naomi knew that at the time. Pip is desperate to go to the police with this photo to clear Sal's name, but she doesn't want to implicate Naomi, and Cara is begging her, don't do this, don't do this. Eventually she decides not to, and she is going to find another way to prove Sal's innocence. Mostly, the only thing she can think of is by finding Andy's actual killer. So we now know 100% Sal is innocent, and there is definitely somebody else involved that wanted to implicate him for Andy's death, and that same person must have been the one to text all of his friends to lie about his whereabouts that night. And there's so many details that keep getting revealed, but none of it feels really far-fetched or out of the blue to me. I've seen many mysteries where it feels like they're just throwing in random things just to trick the audience, and it's just irritating. We talked about Pretty Little Liars before, but that was definitely one where it felt like they were just doing things to trick the audience, but this doesn't feel like it. It feels like everything feels believable and fits within the story rather well, so I enjoy that. Going back through this book, reading it a second time to write out the script, it definitely feels as though you can see the little details that are being thrown in to point you to who the real killer is that you probably won't pick up on your first time reading through. I know I didn't, but I wasn't really looking for it. I was just having fun. But definitely this time around, I'm oh, so that's why that was, oh my gosh, that's why that was there. Okay, I understand this part now. Everything makes sense to me this time around. And I think that's what a big strength of good mystery novels is to be able to have the knowledge to tell you who the killer is before you find out, if you're able to pay enough attention to it. And I think that this book did it really well. That is the end of part 2 of this book. We are on to the final part now, part 3. Hello, I am back for part 3 of the book. I did take a break to go eat dinner, and I came back upstairs and my contacts are killing me, so you're gonna have to deal with the bright ring light in my glasses. Is what it is. But we are gonna get this done. We are doing this today. We're gonna finish it tonight. All right, here we go. Part 3. So, despite claiming as so to both Naomi and Max, Pip does not think that the photo that she has is going to be enough evidence to officially prove Sal's innocence if she goes to the police, and it certainly will not reopen the case. Especially if Daniel is on the force, it's not going to happen. And Ravi is definitely not happy about this. But Pip's we just have to find the real killer, and then we can officially prove that he's innocent. So at this point, Pip has narrowed it down to 5 suspects. She has narrowed it down to 5. The first is Jason Bell. That was her first suspect originally, and he still has plenty of strong motives to have killed his daughter. Howie Bowers is still a suspect despite not being the secret older guy. Natalie certainly has motive, but she has a more solid alibi than most of the other people. And Daniel definitely has the means as well as access to tampering evidence. And finally, Max could be the secret older guy, as well as having that photo of Andy and allegedly spiking drinks at the calamity parties. We also have another hint here about the person who has been sending Pip her threatening notes and messages, and that is the fact that they knew about the hit and run. They were the ones who sent the text to Naomi and Max and the others about lying about Sal's estimated departure time from Max's house the night of Andy's disappearance. So Max is definitely a candidate because he could have just threatened himself to take him off the suspect list. However, he partied a lot and got drunk a lot, so he very easily could have let it slip to someone such as Nat or Howie. Daniel could have put 2 and 2 together through working on the police force and figured it out, but Max still kind of remains the strongest candidate. The unfortunate thing is that Max has an alibi for pretty much the entire night of Andy's disappearance, but he is proven to be super untrustworthy. So, can we take what he says seriously? We don't know. Pip arrives home from school the next day, and it is soon very clear to her that someone has broken into her room. When she opens her laptop, she finds something written at the bottom of her capstone project notes. It reads, "You need to stop this, Pippa." This was written over and over and over, enough to fill 4 whole pages. The next day at school, Pip runs into Nat Da Silva and then finds a threatening note in her locker. Nat has been known to leave threatening notes in lockers before, and she was at the school, so she jumps a little bit higher on Pip's persons of interest list. So after school, Pip decides to go and talk to Becca Bell. She is working at the same newspaper that Stanley Forums works at, and apparently they've been sort of seeing each other. As they're talking, she mentions something about this old farmhouse that she's writing an article about that her dad almost bought, but it's currently abandoned, and Pip's just not really paying attention to her. Pip ends up telling Becca about how Andy was dealing drugs, and Becca's just in complete denial. Pippa was really hoping that Becca might have Andy's burner phone, but Becca can't think of anybody that might have it because she doesn't have it. One interesting little piece of information that we do learn from this conversation is that Daniel Da Silva was rather close with Jason Bell. The top suspect in this book is constantly changing, and once again, this is why I think this is such a good murder mystery. There are so many different suspects with very clear motives and very clear circumstances that would lead to them having the ability to have kidnapped and murdered Andy. And I have just kind of been on my toes the entire time I've been reading this book, and I was just so curious to figure out who had really done it in the end. I mean, there were so many different people who it could have been that I was just waiting to see who it eventually turned out to be. I do think this is an important time to mention that I'm not really big on speculating when it comes to books or even TV shows and movies like this. I just kind of like to go along with the flow and let the book take me where it wants to take me instead of speculating really hard about the mystery. I have more fun at being surprised and shocked at the twists and turns and learning the new information with the characters without having guessed it before it happens. I have way more fun with that. I just think it's fun to go through the mystery the way the author is laying it out. I figured that would be important for me to mention just in case people think it's super obvious who the killer is and they were able to figure it out super quickly. Props to you. I'm glad you enjoyed doing that. Good for you. That's just not me. So back to the book. Later on, Pip is able to go to a meeting that the police are hosting and finds a moment to talk with Daniel. He doesn't reveal much, only the fact that he was the one that filed the report that Max Hastings had crashed his car into a tree outside of his parents' house, This was obviously a story to cover up the hit and run, but it does give a motive and circumstance for Daniel to know about the hit and run. After their conversation, she does spot Daniel and Stanley Forbes talking to one another. Pip is on a walk with her dog the next day and somehow ends up losing him. He cannot be found, and she is absolutely distraught. When she goes home, she ends up getting a text from the unknown number again, asking if she wants to see her dog again. The unknown number then tells her to take all of the research she has done into the Andy Bell disappearance case and bring it to a parking lot. Once there, she has to destroy it if she ever wants to see her dog again. And she does it. She can't lose her dog like that. Later that night, her dad comes up to her room and tells her that somebody had found her dog and he had drowned in a river. And I am so sorry that this had to be a book where a dog died. I hate that this was part of the book, and it literally made me tear up when I read it the first time, and it made me tear up as I was reading it again for the script. It was, I can't believe it. It's horrible. No, why would you kill the dog? Why would you do this, Holly Jackson? Pip is done. She can't keep doing this after what just happened. She can't go through that again and is ready to give it all up. Ravi assures her that she doesn't have to keep looking. He'll take over for right now and she can help him again when she's ready. But she's like, no, I can't do this anymore. And I'm just a kid. I literally can't do this. And she ends up telling Ravi that she destroyed the photo and all of the research. And Ravi's like, no, you can't have. Why would you do this? And it's not fair. And he ends up storming out and Pip is distraught. She ends up saying that he has to hate her, but at least now he'll be safe. She obviously didn't mean all of those things. She just wanted to push him away so he wouldn't get hurt the way her dog got hurt. If that wasn't already clear. This whole thing doesn't last very long, though, because Ravi shows up at her house again the next day and has completely figured out what happened. She ends up telling him about the unknown number and everything that had happened, and then reveals that the research isn't destroyed. Neither is the photo, because she constantly emails herself everything, just to be safe. So they print everything off, and it is time for them to make a murder board. Maybe I should make a murder board. So we're gonna make my own murder board with all the information. Alright, that took me a while. So I am here to present y'all today with my little mini mock-up of a murder board just based off of the current evidence that we have in the book right now and who the suspects are looking into it. Bam. Andy Bell's disappearance. Here we go. So we obviously have Andy in the middle. So obviously we're going to look over here at Max first. Max has the most kind of circumstantial evidence that is pointing towards him currently. He had knowledge of the hit and run, so he knew about that and could have texted the rest of his friends to threaten them. He had the photo of Andy, the one from the Ivy house inn. He had access to all of the phone numbers. And he was also roofing girls, allegedly, at the Calamity parties back in 2014. So we know he's not a great guy. Unfortunately, he has an alibi for at least the majority of the night of Andy's disappearance and definitely during the time of Sal's suicide. So now we move on to Howie. He isn't the secret older guy, we know that, but he did have access to all of the phone numbers, most likely, and he has access to Pip's phone number as well because she accidentally called him while she was trying to, tail him. But he sort of has an alibi. He said he was home drunk the night Andy disappeared and just at his house. He doesn't have the knowledge of the hit and run, but he could potentially We don't know, but it's not definitive whether or not he has knowledge of it. We have Nat Da Silva over here. She had the phone numbers. We don't know if she had access to like the knowledge of the hit and run, but she seems to have an alibi for the night of Andy's disappearance as well. We have Daniel, who has potential knowledge of the hit and run, not necessarily the phone numbers, however, and he sort of has an alibi as well, just what we know from what Nat told Pip. And then finally we have Jason, who has a ton of like different motives that are like very different from like the rest of them. But he did also have an affair. He cheated on his wife, and Andy knew about it, so that's a very good motive. It's also becoming clear, which you can see in the blue, everyone's really connected. All of these suspects are very connected, and that's something that Pip and Robbie have like figured out now. So obviously Daniel and Nat are siblings over here, but Daniel and Jason are rather close. Nat's also connected to Max through knowing each other through school and her potentially getting drugged at one of his parties. Daniel is also connected to Max through the police report on his like car crash. Whether or not he actually knows about the hit and run or if he just did the car crash, there is still a connection there. And finally, we have Max and Howie, with Max buying drugs from Howie, and clearly they know each other from that like screaming match they had the other day. So here's my little first murder board thing. I don't really know if that's what I should be calling it, but that's what it is. It's my little project. I hope you guys liked it. This was fun to draw up. The next day, Pip is trying to figure out some things and ends up looking through her contacts and realizes something about a phone call that she had gotten the day before from Naomi. Naomi had smashed her phone the other day and was using an old one with a random SIM card that she had found. However, the number that Naomi had called her from pretty much matched up perfectly to the scribbled out one from Andy's planner. This was absolutely not what Pip had been expecting, but Naomi definitely fits the bill for all of the things that they definitely know about Andy's killer. She had access to all of her friends' phone numbers as well as Pip's, and she knew about the hit and run and could have left the house at some point during the night to kidnap and kill Andy. She knew about the camping trip that Pip had gone on when she got the first threatening note, and she also knew which woods Pip walked her dog in. However, she did have a good way of seeing if Naomi was the one sending her the notes, at least. While she'd been looking through Cara'S laptop a while ago, she'd set up a way to record everything that had been printed through her family's computer. She just needed to get onto Cara'S laptop again to see if those notes were printed from their house. She goes over to the wards and is carving pumpkins. I think this is on Halloween, and she discovers something shocking. The SIM card that Naomi had been using wasn't her old one. It belonged to her dad. Pip is just floored. She doesn't know what to do, so she's able to borrow Cara'S laptop once again, and she finds that Elliot Ward had printed a note that said, "This is your final warning, Pippa. Walk away." Oh no, did Pip actually find the killer? This certainly concludes that Elliot Ward was the unknown number, which means that he must have been Andy's killer. Pip is obviously freaking out, and she asks, like, "Hey, where's your dad?" And Kara's like, "You know he's tutoring right now. How many times have we told you this?" And we learned that Elliot started tutoring about like 5 years ago, and you know what happened 5 years ago? Andy disappeared. Elliot then comes back from tutoring, and Pip can like barely look him in the eye. She texts Robbie that night. He comes over and she tells him everything. Elliot has no alibi for the night Andy disappeared because one of his daughters was away at Max's house, and the other one was at Pip's house, so he has no alibi. He also has no alibi for the day Sal died, because he had called in sick for work. No one could verify where he was. Andy had mentioned something about ruining the secret older man she was talking to, and if it is Elliot, she very easily could have ruined him because he is a teacher and she was his student. Very easy to ruin him with that. There are still a few gaps, such as they don't think that he knew about the hit and run, but it was clear at least that he has been threatening her and he killed her dog. With all of this new information being brought to light, Pip is questioning if Elliot is even tutoring people, and if he's not, where is he going? Maybe Andy was still alive somewhere and he had her hidden, and that's where he was going. This is where Pip also remembers that Cara keeps mentioning how food is like disappearing from her house after her dad had just bought it, and she concludes that he must be taking it to feed Andy. Must be. She decides that she's going to have to tail him tomorrow when he goes to tutoring to figure out where he goes. Eventually, she decides, okay, we're not going to tail him, but we'll enable Find My Friends on my phone. I'll leave my phone in his car, and we'll just track where he goes instead. She's able to get a ride home with him the next day, leaves her phone in the car, and they end up watching him on like their little tracker and see that he has gone back to the town that the Wards used to live in, and he's on the street they used to live on and near the house that they used to live in as well. Very suspicious. That night, Pip decides that this has to come to an end, so she gets in her car and drives towards the Ward's old house. She calls the police when she gets there, tells them everything she knows before heading inside of the house, instead of just waiting for the police. Elliot's car is there and she goes for it. She knocks on the door and she's like, hey, the police are going to be here soon. You better tell me what has been going on. Elliot confirms that Andy is in the house and she's alive. Here's where we get to learn what really happened. Apparently, Andy had been paying a lot of attention to Elliot, and this was right after his wife had died, and he said it was nice because he'd just been so lonely. So he eventually bought another SIM card so he could talk to her without anybody knowing, and Andy eventually suggested that they should start meeting at the Ivy house. And when Pip is like, wait, did you sleep with her? He doesn't say anything, which is definitely a yes, which is disgusting, gross. He says he's absolutely disgusted with himself and he tried to call it off, but apparently Andy wouldn't let him. Andy was apparently threatening him and ended up leaving the photo that Max has hidden in Elliot's classroom, which is why Max is like, yeah, I was just in the back of a classroom, I swear. So he wasn't lying about that. Shocking, I know. On the night of Andy's disappearance, Elliot was home alone, and Andy just like showed up at his house and was angry and screaming at him and mentioned that the only reason that she was nice to him was because she thought he could get her into Yale with Sal. She apparently didn't want him to leave without her and that she needed to get away from home because it was killing her. In an angry rage, she started to destroy the paintings that Elliot's wife had made, and he eventually shoved her, trying to get her to stop. She fell back and hit her head against his desk, and she was bleeding like crazy. She was still conscious, however, but when he went to go and find the first aid kit, she was gone by the time he came back, and she had accidentally left her phone in the house. The next day, he heard that she was missing and figured that he must have killed her, and it would only be a matter of time before the police found her body, and there would most likely be some sort of evidence that would lead them back to him. So the only thing that he could do was give them a stronger suspect. He was going to frame Sal Singh, and he managed to do it by reading through his daughter Naomi's diary. She had been writing in it since her mom had died and wrote about the hit and run, so he used that to blackmail Naomi and the rest of their friends. So that Tuesday, Elliot had seen Sal in the school parking lot and invited him back to Sal's house just to talk because he was clearly upset about the whole Andy situation. Elliot had decided he was going to kill Sal with one of the Singh's own knives, but he had found the sleeping pills in the house and decided that would be kinder. He lured Sal out into the woods on the promise of trying to do their own search for Andy, and slowly began giving him the pills, saying that they would help with his headache. He eventually held a knife to Sal's neck and made him swallow more and more of the pills. And when he fell unconscious, he tied a plastic bag around his head and held his hand as he died. He then took Sal's phone, sent the confession text to his father, and planted Andy's phone on him, as well as some dried blood from his desk under Sal's fingernails. 3 months go by, it's July now, and Elliot was driving home, and he saw none other than Andy walking on the road. It was clear that she'd been super messed up from drugs, and there was no way he was going to let her go home, because then that would reveal that something bad had happened to Sal, and it wasn't what everybody thought it was. Andy told Elliot that she had just wanted to get away from everything and had gone to a friend's house who was involved in drugs, but she didn't feel safe there, so she had run away to come back home. And she doesn't like talking about it either. So this friend had to have been Howie Bowers. Elliot was now keeping her in the attic, and I guess he had made it up all nice for her, but I don't know, it's still not good at all. Doesn't make it any better. This is all Pip really needed, and she makes sure to tell Elliot that when the police interrogate him, he will not tell them about the hit and run and taking Sal's alibi away. She then accuses him of killing her dog, Barney, and Elliot seems a little confused for a second, but the police have arrived, and there's no time to think about it. Pip steals the key to the attic in the confusion of the police arresting Elliot, and she opens the door to the attic, but it's not Andy there. It's someone completely different. Ravi ends up finding her at the house, and she tells him everything. The girl was definitely not Andy, but had somehow been convinced that she was. In the end, she and Ravi drive home together and spot the Bells driving presumably towards the police station. Both Jason and his ex-wife Dawn are visibly upset. Jason's angry, screaming, Dawn is crying, and Becca is just in the back seat, staring off into space. But when her eyes meet Pip's, there's something heavy there, something urgent, something really hard to read. That night, she tells her parents about what happened and texts Cara to let her know everything because she can't bear to call her. The next day, the police are set to release a statement about Sal's innocence, but Pip isn't satisfied though. There is still the question of what really happened to Andy. Ravi tells her though that their part is done, they did what they set out to do, they proved that Sal was innocent, they should stop. But does it sound like Pip to give up? No, it doesn't. She ends up updating the murder board with all of the new information she had gathered. She looks through everything, and there's just one thing that does not make sense to her. Andy was seen leaving her house in her car around 10:30, 10:40 at night by a security camera. However, Elliot said that she came over to his house around 10. And there's no way she was driving away later after that whole confrontation with the gaping wound on the back of her head. And how did the blood get in her trunk? There was another thing that wasn't adding up as well, and that was the look of confusion on Elliot's face when Pip accused him of killing her dog. She goes back to look at the paper notes that she has gotten, as well as the text from the unknown number, and notices that there's a very stark difference between the printed notes that she knows are from Elliot and the unknown text messages. On the notes from Elliot, he always calls her Pippa, but on the text, they're a lot more angry and call her threatening things. This unknown number was the one that made her smash her laptop and who killed her dog, and was most likely Andy's real killer, and she had to find them. Her mind keeps wandering back to the bells in their car and how Jason was so upset and angry, and there was just no way to have faked that reaction. So that officially crosses him off the list. Pip starts to connect more and more dots, thinking back to the drinks that had been spiked at the parties, as well as her conversation with Jess Walker. She ends up calling Max Hastings to figure out if she is right. And she's able to figure out one of the girls that had been drugged and assaulted back in 2014. Max had drugged and assaulted Becca Bell, and she was the last person to see Andy alive. Pip rushes over to the Bell's house, ready to confront Becca. And here's where she learns what had been happening in the last couple of days at least. The girl that Elliot had kidnapped was a girl named Isla Jordan, who had a learning disability and the mental age of a 12-year-old. She had been living as Andy for so long that she really thought that that's who she was. This is where Pip puts all of her cards on the table and lays out everything that she knows to Becca. Becca went to this calamity party with Jess Walker, and something happened to her that night that she doesn't remember. She didn't tell Jess about what happened, not because she was embarrassed, but because she genuinely didn't know, because she was drugged. She then gets Becca to tell her what happened the night of April 18th, 2014. Becca said that she had found out that somebody had bought weed from Andy, and when Andy left that night, she did some snooping around in her room and found the burner phone. Through this, she was able to figure out that Max Hastings had bought the roofies from Andy that were used to drug her. When Andy came home after speaking with Elliot that night, Becca laid everything out on the table for her, and Andy's just like, I don't care. Becca didn't know that she was injured at this time. Andy was insistent that Becca could not tell anybody about the drugs or she'd get into a lot of trouble, and Becca was just furious and pushed Andy to the ground. Andy laid there for a moment before starting to get sick and then choking on her own vomit, and Becca just froze. She didn't do anything and just watched as eventually Andy completely died just on the floor in their house. In this moment, Becca knew that everybody would think that she had purposefully killed Andy, even though it was a complete accident. She left their house with Andy's body in the trunk at around 10:40, and this was what was seen on the security tape leaving the house that night. Everyone presumed it was Andy leaving, but it was really Becca. She put Andy's body in the septic tank of the old abandoned farmhouse that her dad was thinking about buying, and she left the car on Howie's street because she realized that that was where her dealer lived and hoped that maybe this would implicate him if anything was ever found out. Stanley Forbes ended up telling Becca that there was a kid in town investigating Andy's disappearance, and this terrified her, so she ended up following Pip and saw her go into Howie's house, and that's when she first decided to text Pip using Andy's old burner phone. After Pip talked to her in her office at the newspaper, she got desperate. She thought Pip was onto her, and that's when she kidnapped her dog and made her destroy the evidence. Becca did let Barney go, but she figures it was dark and he must have fallen somehow and ended up in the river. Despite everything, Pip isn't there to accuse Becca, more so to warn her to try and get out of the country because the police will be on to her. All of a sudden, though, things start to go fuzzy and Pip's eyelids start getting heavy. Becca had drugged her using Max's old pills that she had found. She's able to hear Becca say that there's no evidence, it's just you and what you know, and she doesn't want to do this, but she doesn't have any other choice. Pip tries to escape, but the drugs are too strong. She tries to run, but eventually Becca catches her and starts to strangle her. All of a sudden, Becca is thrown off of her, and Ravi and her dad are there. Pip is able to get out what happened and where Andy is before the drugs overtake her, and she passes out. 2 months later, everything is all right. Ravi and Pip's dad were able to find her because the Find My Friend feature was still available on Pip's phone, and she is finally able to present her research for her final capstone project, and we and the rest of the town now know that Becca Bell was responsible for her sister Andy's death. Alrighty, we have reached the end of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This was such a fascinating book for me to read. I absolutely adored it. I was super invested in it, and I'm not a big mystery thriller person, but this definitely has got me started. I went to Barnes & Noble yesterday and I got a few more books in this genre because I was like, hey, if this is good, maybe I'll like some other ones. So if you have any recommendations for mystery books similar to this one, please let me know. I'm looking forward to reading some new ones. But I absolutely loved the way this is written, and I think I really got a good appreciation for it reading it through a second time while writing the script for this video. I was really able to pick up on all of the little details that I had talked about before that linked both Elliot and Becca to the deaths of Sal and Andy that I just didn't pick up on before. Like Cara constantly mentioning that food, specifically Butterfingers, had been disappearing from her house, the tutoring, all of the different things like that. I totally didn't pick up on those at first, but everything came together and everything really made sense, which I appreciated so much. I love when there's a nice full circle moment. I do think, though, that one of the biggest things that kept me interested in this book was the character of Pip. She was very interesting to me, mostly just because she isn't just this super clean-cut girl going after, to try and, solve a case with perfectly good intentions. She is someone who doesn't make the best decisions. She always goes for the information rather than, really considering the situations, and is definitely a little bit rash. She really goes full head on into situations such as ambushing Max and Howie in their houses to try and demand information without knowing if they're going to be hostile or if she could get hurt. She is just going after that information, and I found her really interesting to read about. I also thought it was really interesting reading through her inner thoughts that she wrote down in her notes for her project. I think that having it be through that format was really interesting. I keep saying interesting, but it's the only thing I can think of to say. It was really interesting to see how she thought about things, and it really gave a better insight into who she is as a character. Another thing about Pip that I really liked was that I could sort of see myself in her a little bit. I, as I stated in the beginning of this video, can get very obsessed with things when I get into them, and that was a big point of this book, was that Pip got so obsessed with solving this case that she just kind of threw everything else in her life aside in order to try and solve this case, and that wasn't healthy. And I won't say I go that far, but I do get obsessed. I mean, I read an entire book series in a day because it was interesting to me. And she is very school focused. She's a good student. I guess I would consider myself to be a pretty good student. And I don't know, I like reading books where I can see myself in the main character, even if we're not the same, having like little like specific things that like fit together with me. I personally like that sort of thing. I know it's not for everybody, but that's just my own personal opinion. I think it's nice to be able to see that, but it's personal preference. It's whatever you want. There is a iced tea bottle on my floor. We're gonna turn this way. You didn't see that. So in the end, I really enjoyed this book, and I also really enjoyed the rest of the series. So if you guys would like me to talk about the other 2 books in the series, I would be very happy to. This was a lot of fun for me to read through again, put together, and talk about for you guys. Once again, I do want to say the biggest thank you so much to all of you for all of the recent support on my videos. You guys are amazing, and I so look forward to creating more videos for you guys. I am working on part 2 of my Percy Jackson recap series, if you guys were looking out for that. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, comment down below what your favorite part of this book was, and if you have any recommendations for mystery books for me, please let me know. I am so unfamiliar with this genre. I would love to hear your recommendations, and with that being said, I will see you in the next one. Bye!